We're going to continue our examination of the tabernacle. God used to tent and live with the people in the wilderness. Today we're going to be talking about the table, but we're focusing on the tabernacle because that's where grace is measured out. That's where the beauty of creation becomes complete. That's what the metaphor is. It's a little like in the Revelation of John when we talk about the glassy sea. That's because all the tumult of the sea and all the horror and fear of it is evened out and the sea becomes glass and peaceful. It's that way when things are measured out. And at the center of the tabernacle is the mercy seat, surrounded by a curtain, which is effectively a door to the sacred, that place where God's love and God's creative power interacts, becomes interpenetrated into creation so that things can move forward, evolve into the great, beautiful end that God has in mind. So with that in mind, as we seek to participate in that sacred moment, we're going to read about the table, piece of furniture that helps us be included in the power of God that moves with the people. You shall make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Remember, there's perfect order in everything that's done here. You shall overlay it with pure gold and make a molding of gold around it. You shall make round it a rim of handbreadth wide and a molding of gold around the rim. You shall make for it 4 rings of gold and fasten the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. The rings that hold the poles used for carrying the table shall be closed to the rim. You shall make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold, and the table shall be carried with these. You shall make its plates and dishes for incense, and its flagons and bowls with which to pour drink offerings. You shall make them of pure gold, and you shall set the bread of the presence on the table before me always. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. Would you pray with me? Spirit of God, your texts are ancient. The idea of a tent wandering around in the wilderness is perhaps odd. And yet there is comfort in the midst of it. And so we ask that you will inspire us to understand how this old text might speak to our hearts on this day. Amen. Seems to me as though Americans are a curious lot, yes? You know, built into our understanding of ourselves is that rugged individualism. Nobody's going to push us around. We're going to stand for what we're going to stand for as individuals. It's built into our literature. Huck Finn, who would travel around on his own, making life for himself, for instance. It's built into our television shows, for goodness sakes. I mean, have you ever seen a cop show, for instance, where the brilliant detective does not get into difficulty in a struggle with his boss? You know, just once, I would like a brilliant detective to walk into his boss's office and have his boss say, "Wow, you're fabulous. What can I do to help?" But that doesn't happen in our rugged individualist society. We stand for ourselves. We have imbibed the freedom of modernism, the individual freedom, in a way that many places have not. It's part of our DNA. It's who we are. And that shows up in our religion as well. We want to be able to decide for ourselves what to believe and what not to believe. We want to decide for ourselves where it is that we stand in relationship to God, and we're not all that interested in being told by others what to do. That's why we have a huge group of people in this country called the spiritual but not religious, the SBNR. 34% of the people in our country right now, and it's rising, 34% identify as spiritual but not religious. You see, they don't want to be part of a religious group where you are somehow, at least in their heads, told what it is that they need to do and believe. Millennials, my son's generation, 72% of them are spiritual but not religious. It's kind of interesting. You know, the spiritual but not religious, they leave the church and they say, well, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. But do you know of anything that they do? I mean, really, usually that would connect them in a spiritual way to the presence of God, to the door of the sacred? Not usually. It's usually just kind of an excuse to move away from a religious setting. Now, there's good reasons for it. I get it. Religion has done a really bad job over the centuries and millennia. I mean, it gets mixed up in all kinds of things it shouldn't. It supports slavery in the past, it has. You know, there's a way in which Christianity has kept women down, kept them from flourishing and being everything that God created them to be. Don't do a particularly good job at that. And then there's the way in which we insist that the dominant sexual paradigm must be true for all people. Religion, I understand why individuals might want to walk away, especially when we try and promote a morality that doesn't fit with the culture. You know, morality has a context. It always fits into the society. It's an interface, and rules change. But if they change just because of what I want, well, then things can really go off. If morality is done in conversation with God, that's another thing entirely. And then we insist that people believe this, that, or the other thing, you know, some magical myth, and people have left as a result of that. I worry about the church. We haven't found the language to be able to communicate to people the love of God, the door to the sacred. Because we send kids to school, that's the problem. Send kids to school and they find out that the world was not created in 6 calendar days and God rested on the 7th. They begin to question what's going on, and we haven't really found the language. So people leave religion and the church right now in droves. They're gone. I think it was John Lennon who said, imagine no religion. I understand the sentiment, religion being a part of what creates war when it's abused, but really it's pretty easy to imagine a world without religion. We're living in it. We're living in a world where there's human trafficking. I was always struck by the fact that at the First Presbyterian Church of San Rafael, next door, there was a brothel, right next door. And we tried to get it shut down, but we just couldn't get it done. You know, there's just this world where people want to use other people. We live in a world where there are school shootings, just seems for the heck of it. We live in a world where starvation happens, even in our country. We live in a world where everyone is so self-centered that our politics have become polarized. And well, you know all of this. Imagine a world without religion. We're living in one. Why is that? That's because we have lost a shared context of meaning. That's what religion provides, a shared context of meaning. If we have a religious structure, we understand, okay, I'm not just living for me. I'm living for that one that connects with us in the door of the sacred. I am living to contribute to something that's important. We need narratives, coherent narratives that give our life meaning and draw us together. The Jews really get that. I mean, when you think about it, they've had a narrative that has given their lives meaning and drawn their community together for 3,000 years. 12 tribes of Israel. They're there to produce a nation so that God can show the world what it is like to live loving the world. They may or may not live up to that, but that's the coherent narrative. That's the meaning. But without a shared meaning, there's nothing to live for and nothing to die for. And so we get turned in on ourselves. That's a world without religion. A few years ago, I was in a book group that studied brain science and how it impacts our lives. It's a fellow named Eagleton who wrote that it's the very structure of our brains that require a coherent narrative in order to live. That sanity is to have a narrative where we can live that makes some sense of the life that we're living. Without religion, we begin to lose that. We are social creatures and we need a narrative of shared meaning or our society comes apart. Spiritual but not religious, I get it, but it doesn't work. That's just the way it is. So we have this narrative of meaning that the Jews offered us, an extraordinary gift about a God of grace that connects with, that walks with, that lives within us. And they have these stories that tell us, how do you go about touching that moment? How do you be transformed by the power and the strength of that creative God? And that's why we're looking at the furniture of all things. Today, it's the table. There's a table right outside that curtain, where God kisses the earth, the door to the sacred. And what's done at the table? Well, the table's a place where the community gathers. That's always been the case. It's a place where people bring their offerings. They bring offerings of grain and offerings of drink. Why? So that they can be blessed and then shared with everyone, so that they can have a party. That's what those gifts and offerings and sacrifices are for. They're to draw the people of God together and give them an opportunity to build that community and to be enjoying the presence of God. That's what we're doing today when we take our time, eat the bread, and drink the cup. And we bring those gifts to the community, to the church, we do, so that they can make a difference in that shared goal of meaning that we have. We're coming into the season where we make those annual decisions about how much we will or will not give to our community. So this is a moment to consider. What is it that we want to contribute to this group of people that are offering us the stability of a coherent narrative that brings us into contact with the sacred? That's one of the things that we do at the table. But there are other things, because the table also is where we learn about the context of meaning. It's where we wrestle it out. I don't know about you, but I was born into a home that talked about faith. My grandmother's home, my great-grandmother's home, they talked about faith at the table. It was where you tried to figure it out and figure out your place. It was where you asked questions. It was where you got to find that way of having a coherent narrative that made sense to you, but also connected you to others. We're living in a world where religion is getting lost. And one of the reasons is that people don't have the opportunity to work out that coherent narrative. Now, it used to be it didn't matter if everybody in the church could articulate a faith that made sense. It didn't matter because everybody basically believed the same thing. Those things weren't in any kind of controversy, but that's not the case now. We're living in a world that rejects religion because, well, it ends up rejecting a God that we don't believe in anyway. As my friend Mark likes to say, the God you don't believe in doesn't exist, never did. But we come to a table because this is the place where, as a community, we figure out how is it that we want to describe our faith to all those people out there who are desperately lonely and living only for themselves instead of for the presence of God. Rockville is in a position right now to think about those things. Different preachers have different strengths. There's a woman named Glenda Hope a few years ago, an incredible preacher who preached social action time and time again. She was extraordinary. Right? There are others who preach encouragement. Me, My strength, I think it's fair to say, is I preach in a way that invites people into thinking through what it is they believe, moves people to a place where they may be able to articulate that coherent narrative of love, that cohesive strategy that allows people to be absorbed into that moment of sacredness. So you might want to take my tenure here as an opportunity. I think by now you've figured out I'm not particularly threatening. I don't insist people agree with me. But if we're at the table, as we're gathered as a community, these are the moments to learn to articulate faith so that we can share it and invite people in, because we're living in a society without religions, and it's showing. So that's the deal as we come to this table. We have a tremendous amount to offer, and a society desperate for the presence of God. People need the hope. They need to know that God is in fact interpenetrating creation. There is a movement in the world that will bring love and beauty and coherence. It's what the Tabernacle tells us with all its fine measurements. Everything put together in proportion. A creation that comes to its fruition when the complexity and the beauty emerges and just blows us away with the love that it has to offer. You and I have an opportunity to share that. We can share that in our gifts to one another, and share that with the people around us, who I think are thirsty to be part of religion, even if they do hate the word.